So, I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about um, mindfulness and how the definition can become really important instruction. And I'd love to unpack this and look closely at the definition of mindfulness with you tonight. Because, one, I think it's so rich with instruction. Each of its four components are little instruction manuals within their own right. And put together, they give us a roadmap of a very powerful, life-changing practice. I think you already know that, or I don't think you'd be here. And in these times of the corona pandemic, with so much uncertainty, so much fear, to ground back into the depth of mindfulness and to be reminded of what is important and what we can do versus what we can't do right now seems critical to me. So just to refresh us as to what are these four components. The definition of mindfulness that I use, which was from my teacher, John Kabat-Zinn, is paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment. So before we even get into the first of these four, paying attention, I'd just like to invite you to reflect on your own life for just a minute. So if it's useful to you just to sit back and close your eyes so you can access your memory and your interiority, just to let your mind float back over just today. Where has your attention been today? How conscious have you been about where your attention has been moment to moment? How conscious have you been? And as you reflect on some memories from today, which probably gives you a good idea of where your attention was, because memories flow from attention, have these places where you brought your attention supported your intention of a peaceful, compassionate, mindful life. So in reflection, where you found yourself paying attention, do they support this journey that you're on? So just to hold that for until we come to the end of this, and perhaps we'll have a little time to talk about this. But attention is such a precious commodity. Essentially, how we spend our time and where we place our attention will determine how our life turns out. I could argue that attention is our greatest asset. And everyone and everything is constantly trying to get it, right? Spouses, partners, employers, employees, kids, parents, friends, pets. But it's not the people that we know, it's the people that we don't know that are trying to get our attention that are so troubling to me, and that I think are leading to so much of our suffering. And I don't mean the stranger on the street or the neighbor you've never met. I mean the advertisers, social media, the forces that depend on your attention for their survival. You know, our attention is more hijacked than it ever has been. People complain to me so often that their attention is terrible, that they can't even read a book anymore. I had someone tell me recently who used to have a meditation practice about a year ago. He really just stopped meditating, that he can barely get through one story in the newspaper without looking at his phone. without becoming distracted? Like, is it possible to spend from 6 p.m. to 7:15 without picking up the phone? And this fella who was talking to me said he so wants to find that quality of attention and concentration that he had when he had a daily practice. But he's fearful that he'll never find it again. And of course he will, because that's neuroplasticity. It, whatever we practice develops. The other day I had Magoo at this little forest that I take him to walk sometimes. And there were, a handful of people in a fairly large area, but every single person I passed, and I'm not kidding, had their head in their phone. We were in the middle of this beautiful forest. It was stunning to me. It matters where we place our attention. Where we place our attention is what we tend to think about. And maybe this seems obvious, but I actually don't think it is when we are going through our day. Think about, for example, the last time you saw a movie. I saw a very powerful movie the other night. And the next morning, that movie had ended, 8 hours before, but it was still very much in my mind, in my thoughts. And this is what happens in our life. Where we place our attention in this moment leads to the next moment. So where do you want to place your attention? This is a very important question. And this brings us to the second part of the mindfulness definition, on purpose. When we're operating on autopilot, the opposite of mindfulness, we know how attention works. Something very pleasurable or very painful happens, and that tends to grab our attention. Not so much on purpose, but just because it has a big enough wow factor. Moving through our day on autopilot, we certainly bring enough attention to what we're doing in order to get it done. Sometimes better, sometimes not so much. But when we start practicing mindfulness, and again, I think every single person here knows this, you really get to see the difference between when you're 100% present and when you're more like 50% present. So how do we pay attention on purpose? When I think about this question, I think about two possibilities that are slightly different from one another. The first is how we bring purposeful attention in any given moment. It begins with awareness that we're not particularly present, most likely. And with this awareness, we can pause. We can invite that powerful pause. And we can bring intentionality to the experience. We choose where we want our attention to be. And with the intention to direct our attention to a particular place, situation, or person, the full moment is revealed to our senses. And I'll give you an example. Just today, just about 4 o'clock, I was sitting outside and it was such beautiful weather. I was in the quiet of my small backyard with the green grass underneath my feet, the cherry tree in front of me, a big blue sky above me, and funny Willa Dean chasing a bumblebee. So aware, so grateful. And then my mind began to wander. I was right there. And next I wasn't. And as my mind wandered to the umpteen emails I've gotten from Trek for me to buy a new bicycle, which I have 3, I was gone. I was gone. Like, I still saw Willa Dean jumping up in the air. The tree was there. The sky was there. But the gratitude just fell away. The vivid nature of everything kind of dampened. And luckily, I was able to remember, oh yeah, I don't have to do that. I don't have to reach for my phone to see if that one mountain bike I really would like to have is on sale. That doesn't bring me peace. It brings me another bicycle, more debt, and I can't ride for. But it's amazing how I can forget all of those details and forget that the most important thing to me is to have peace, presence, and compassion in this life. So the other possibility is consciously working with intention, purpose each day. Taking the time to explore what values are most important to you. And you might find yourself right now with a little more time than usual. Not everybody has that, but some people do. And, taking the time to get really conscious about what principles guide you, because these frame the path of this life journey. And once we can get consciously aware of these, we have this ethical guidepost that we can consistently reflect on and gain a greater understanding of when we're in alignment and therefore most likely more peaceful, and when we're out of alignment and most likely heading down a path of suffering. So again, just to use an example, I have a deep value of non-harming. And I am often reflecting on how my own thoughts and words and actions embody this value, and when I struggle to live up to this value. And the fourth part of the definition of mindfulness, without judgment, reminds us that it is indeed not useful to bring judgment to when we're struggling, to when we find ourselves messy, and when we make mistakes. But I'll come back to that piece of non-judgment. But quite the opposite, when I fail to live up to my value, this guiding principle of non-harm, I actually have an opportunity to explore the circumstances of the experience. This is mindfulness. To look at what hijacked my intention of non-harming. If I said something that wasn't very charitable or hurt somebody that I love, my mindfulness wasn't as strong as I needed it to be. And when I can look at this with kindness, I can grow and learn, and that strengthens my path to peace. And compassion here is so warranted, because when I'm not coming from a value of non-harming, I'm usually suffering in some way already with fear or feelings of inadequacy or shame, all mind states that deserve compassion. So just to give you an example of a way to work with values and intention, purposeful attention, each morning, and many of you have heard me say this, each morning before I begin my meditation practice, I spend some time quietly reviewing and reflecting on the value of non-harming. And for me, in keeping with the 5 precepts found in Buddhist psychology, I set a vow each morning to not harm, but to nurture every living being. And the other 4 phrases are basically riffs on this broad vow each day to not harm. And they break the non-harming down into specific parts. Again, because I want to pay attention on purpose to what's most important. So the second one is vowing not to speak dishonestly or destructively or divisively, but instead to speak and listen from the heart. To vow not to engage in any sexual misconduct, but to treat every human being with respect and dignity. To vow not to take anything that isn't freely given to me, but to practice generosity and gratitude. And to not intoxicate the mind and body, but to cultivate wise seeing, wisdom. This is just an aspiration, but it's an important one, as each of our values are to us. It's really an important part of mindfulness to spend the time to know what are these and how do we bring mindfulness to them each day. So this brings us to the third component of the definition, the present moment. I'm fairly certain that if you have not touched into the beauty, the groundedness, the serenity of the present moment, you probably wouldn't be here today. The present moment, as I'm guessing all of us know, is actually the place that life happens. And when our mind is wild and conditioned to jumping from the past to the future and back again to the past, it's the present moment that we miss, that it skips over. And it's our life that we miss out on. And in addition, and I think this is so important right now in this pandemic, the present moment is also an antidote to anxiety and fear. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't some people that when they touch into this present moment who are already very sick or even just emotionally distressed. I'm not minimizing that this isn't painful, and I'll actually talk about that. But pain is different than anxiety and fear. And I actually think that we could all use a lot of present moment experience right now to ease the fires of anxiety around this pandemic. But mindfulness is more than just the recognition of the present moment. We can actually recognize that anxiety is present, but if we're subtly bringing aversion to that experience, if the body is contracted, if the mind is pushing away, that's actually not mindfulness. It may be a bit of what we call self-awareness in Western psychology, but in the true understanding of mindfulness, this is not it. With mindfulness, when we bring awareness to the present moment, it's a non-judgmental awareness. It's a balanced awareness in which we're neither wanting more of whatever's here, nor are we wanting to push away from what's here. So equanimity or balance is embedded in mindfulness. And you may be familiar with the meditation teacher Tara Brach, who has really popularized the acronym RAIN. RAIN stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And this can be a very useful process to engage in when we become aware that the present moment is difficult. Perhaps we recognize that we're sitting in fear. But with the next step, allow, we begin to relax the body. We began to open up to the aversion. And with the I in RAIN, investigate, we continue to turn toward the experience to become more intimate with it. This is mindfulness. To really know it, to see where it is in the body and in the mind. And with nurture, we bring that non-judgmental component to it, offering care and compassion to whatever is being experienced. So moving to the fourth and final part of the definition of mindfulness, without judgment. This is a whole talk. This is a whole course. In fact, it actually is a course called Mindful Self-Compassion. The need for this class comes from the fact that the vast majority of us live with a pretty deeply rooted and loud inner critic. And just sidebar, if this is a useful topic for you and you'd like us to spend more time talking about this component of mindfulness, the without judgment, shoot me an email and let me know. I'm always interested in what you all would like to hear about that supports your practice. But the inner critic seems for many of us to always be lurking, waiting for the next thought or word or action just to see if commenting is needed. Well, this inner critic is also really just a habituated thought stream that we've been cultivating most of our lives. So even though I talk about it as if it has a life of its own, I also really want to be careful about this because even though it's been very powerful in many of our lives, it isn't actually more powerful than mindfulness. It's a thought pattern. And when we find ourselves in a tough spot, aware of the harshness internally, we bring attention to this, that first part of mindfulness. And then we set our intention in that moment, the second part of mindfulness, to turn toward it, not to run away, not to become more destructive toward ourselves or others. And we move into what the experience is like in the present moment, that third part of mindfulness. And when we find ourselves able to do this, saying, yes, I can be with this harsh, judgmental feeling, the judgment of the judgment begins to relax. And when mindfulness begins to show up in our lives more and more, dropping the judgment over and over, a new sense of neutrality is born, of balance, and of compassion. And this compassion and balance become more and more of our lives. So looking closely at the definition of mindfulness, we begin to see the instructions contained within it. So perhaps this week you'll think more consciously about attention, where you place it. Maybe you'll think about intention, touching into your values. What are they? How do they drive this path? What's possible from being in the present moment and being more mindful about letting go of the judgment so often associated with our thoughts, words, and actions? So I think I'll stop there. Thank you for your attention. I hope this has been useful. And I'd like to just invite us to take a couple of moments now, just to sit back in our chairs, to close the eyes if that's comfortable, and to come into silence. And just let these words be digested. See if there's anything that arises in your own mind that feels important to speak to or to perhaps come back to on your own. Just noticing what's here.